In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. You know, even within the same languages, words are sometimes used differently and have different meanings. And what, you may ask, does this mean to you? Well, I don't know for sure, but I was told that in London's Heathrow Airport, instead of having signs on the door that say exit, there's signs that's what we're used to in America, right? The signs that they have is way out. I like that. Way out, man. Way out is an exit strategy or an escape route. It's kind of like what St. Paul was writing to the Corinthians about in our epistle reading this morning. Those Christian converts in the city of Corinth were struggling with temptation and sin, and Paul was telling them that they didn't have to stay there in the wilderness of sin. Temptation might be inevitable, but sin wasn't. Instead, they could flee from temptation through a God-provided way out. You'll get used to that phrase before the sermon is over. In our epistle reading for this 9th Sunday in Trinity, Paul begins by telling the Corinthians that they should remember history's mistakes. Why? Well, one of the reasons that we can escape temptation's hold on us is to reflect on what has already happened to somebody else. As everyone's history teachers probably told you, those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. Well, along those lines, Paul gave an example of the Israelites wandering around in the wilderness. As the Hebrews drifted in the desert, they had trouble keeping their faith. When they should have been trusting that God would take care of them, they were complaining that God had brought them out into the desert to starve and die of thirst. While Moses was up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, the Hebrews were down in the valley worshiping a golden calf and behaving badly. Paul then tells the Corinthians the results of these sins. There is consequences for your actions. God was not pleased with the Hebrew people, and thousands of them were killed and scattered in the desert. Paul suggests that that should be a word to the wise. Now today, we might not have to go all the way back to Moses for a historical lesson. Who among us can't remember a story that a grandparent or a parent or an aunt or uncle or anyone that we know has told us about what they did and the consequences of it? And they always end with, please, don't do that same thing. And we did anyway because we're smarter than they are. Right? It didn't matter whether it was drinking or smoking or sex or drugs or, making bad choices in friendships or marriages or financial dealings or gambling or just whatever. There was someone in our community that stepped up and said, look, I messed up. Don't you do it too. Please listen to my story and learn from my experience. If you'll learn from history's mistakes, you'll see that God has provided for us a way out. Another way out of temptation provided by God is the advice Paul offers in verse 12. Don't be too sure of yourself. What he really says is, if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Well, a bit of humility or a little self-doubt can be a way out of a number of difficult situations. Pride always goes before the fall, right? Celebrity news today is full of examples of people who think they can engage in all kinds of risky behavior without consequences. You just turn on your TV and you'll find them. They think that because they make so much money, they're invincible. Or I assume that. I don't have a whole lot of money, so I don't know about invincibility. They think that because they're famous, they can do anything and it won't matter. But eventually, the laws of gravity, or the laws of mankind, or the laws of human limitations catch up with them. We make mistakes when we think we're too good to fail. We fall into temptation when we think that we're immune to evil. We commit sin when we think too highly of ourselves and go busting through life without sufficient caution. In the Christian tradition, we uphold Jesus as the person who would have had the most reason to be sure of himself. Jesus was the only man we know of that was without sin, but even Jesus was tempted. And how did he handle it? How did he find his way out? Well, over and over, the gospel portrays Jesus as one who would lower himself to be present with the lowly, the sick, and the outcast of his society. Jesus even bowed himself down and washed the disciples' feet. In Philippians chapter 2, we're told that Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant. A certain degree of self-confidence is necessary for us to do what is right and what is good. But we must also have a sense of humility that gives us pause. In situations of temptation where it would be easy for us to make the wrong choice, some measure of self-questioning will often provide us with a better alternative. And it's advice for us not to be too sure of ourselves. God provides us with a way out. And the third piece of advice, 3-point sermon, Paul gives is that we should recognize that temptation is common. If we think that we're the only ones who have ever suffered so much, or the only ones who have struggled so hard, then we will likely end up giving in to temptation. We'll simply view it as an impossible situation in which we have no other choice. But if we recognize that no temptation comes our way that hasn't been around the block at least 1,000 times, then we might be able to find someone who has overcome that temptation, and we may just find a way out. That's the power of coming to church, or a 12-step program, or a diet program like Weight Watchers. If we think we're all alone, then we isolate ourselves even worse. The temptation becomes even more gripping. But if we can recognize that our temptations are real to lots and lots of people, then we can find help and hope. If we can get ourselves into a supportive community of people who are likewise trying to better themselves, then the success stories that come our way will offer us possibilities that we never even knew existed. This idea of using a support group doesn't come naturally to us, though. We're Americans. We've got that cowboy idea in our heads, and we can handle anything. We're independent. We can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. But that isn't what Paul meant. In his letter to the Corinthians, Paul was using the plural word you. When he said that God won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, he didn't mean that as an all by yourself you. He meant that as a collective you. When one of us bears temptation, we all bear temptation. And collectively is how we can resist it. What would drag one person down has much less power on the whole group. When we're faced with temptation and sin, we must remember that we aren't alone. There are lots of people who've been down that road before, and there are lots of people who are eager to help us avoid the wrong turns and do the right thing. Through the common nature of our temptation, God has provided us a way out. As I was trying to figure out how to wrap up the sermon, I typed in the words "way out" in Google, and a bunch of things appeared. One of them was this astronomy site with a cow jumping over the moon. If you correctly answered the educational game questions about planets, stars, and galaxies, you could get the cow to jump way out into space. Another way out was the lyrics of a song. And if there was ever a song I didn't want to hear, this has to be it. It was about those smoking, chewing, loose dog survivalist type guys who would shoot you with their gun if you visited their way out in the wilderness home without permission. Well, neither of those ideas is what I was trying to tell you today. The way out which God provides doesn't have to be far away or isolated from people. In fact, the beauty of God's way out is that it's right here, close at hand. It's built into our history, it's inherent in our own humility, and it's available in a supportive community. We may be weak, but God is faithful. Just because we're tempted doesn't mean we have to sin. God always provides for us a way out. And for that, we're very thankful. Amen.
Amen.
Remember the words of our Lord Jesus, how he said it is more blessed to give than to receive.